Madam Groundwitch, said the man at the front of the room. Whom have you brought to visit? Good morning, Guildmaster Vahoon, Olympia smiled, and then as quick as the turn of a page she scowled at the students. They all winced as if she had looked each of them in the eye at the same time. Her whiskers trembled like little snakes about to strike. I came to introduce you and the Guildlings to our 3 new students. They're the children of Nia Igby Wingfeather, who happens to be the Queen of Anira. She paused. I said, she's the Queen of Anira. Fahoon jumped and dropped the apple. Sorry, Guild Madam. It's unusual for us to have guests of such stations. Guildlings, rise and bow. The children did so. Nia motioned for them to sit. There we go. Nia motioned for them to sit. The eldest son is Janner, and the daughter is Lily. I'll wait till I get this looking right. Not quite liking it. Oops. That probably won't work either, but we'll go with it. The children rise and bow. The children did so, and Nia motioned for them to sit. The eldest son is Janner, the daughter is Lily, and the one who looks like a gray fang is, in fact, Kalmar Wingfeather, who is, in fact, the High King, since his father fell to the fangs many years ago. Oi! Again, Guild Madam Groundwitch paused. When the students didn't move, she lowered her voice to a frightening tone. Rise and bow! The students scrambled to their feet and bowed again, and Janner could hear whispers among them. Kalmar stared at the floor and flattened his ears. Nia nudged Kalmar, and he said, thank you, his growly voice. Thank you. His growly voice carried through the hall. You may, sit. The whispers rose in volume as the children settled on the floor again. Proceed, said Olympia from another long glare, and she closed the door. The tension vanished when they were cut off from the hall, and Janner's shoulder slumped with relief. There, that went better than I expected, Groundwitch said, as the children, and led them out the door and down a covered walkway. Brimstone padded happily beside Lily. Vines wrapped around the columns and clung to the roof. Grapes dangled like dollops of candy everywhere. They turned. Olympia plucked a few as she passed and told the children they were welcome to snack as well. Lily, you're going to like this, said Olympia. Brimstone, as you can see, is already excited about it. The dog barked and bolted ahead of them to the next stone building. The shingle hanging over the door was carved with the silhouette of a dog. Houndery, it read. Brimstone wagged her tail and pawed at the entrance. Olympia pushed open the heavy door, and a chorus of barks, whines, and howls poured out. With the noise came the smell of dog and hay, tinged with the odor of animal waste. Kalmar winced and covered his face, but Lily's eyes widened. She looked at Nia with disbelief. Guild Madam Groundwitch's dog bolted through the door, and Lily hurried after. The inside of the chamber was as full of dogs as the Guildling Hall was full of children. But unlike the students, the dogs were glad to see them. They barked happy barks and circled the wing feathers, wagging tails and sniffing at boots and whining to be petted. Lily dropped her crutch and hugged the first dog that approached her. It put a paw on it as big as a saucer on her shoulder and panted in her face. Another dog nosed his way under her other arm, and she stood supported between them, smiling so wide that her face turned pink. Then the dogs trotted forward and dragged her along. Lily squealed with delight as they paraded her around the room, pursued by a train of barking dogs, most of which were as tall as Lily. Janner and Kalmar laughed. It was as if the Maker had prepared a place just for their sister. Guild Madam Groundwitch and Nia left Lily to her glory and led the boys across the room to the office door. Hey, hello, Biggin? Groundwitch knocked on the door as she opened it. Biggin O'Sally? Biggin's gone. Just us. A boy swaggered into the doorway and leaned against it as if he didn't have a care in the world. He wore a white shirt without sleeves, and his pants were held up with suspenders. He tilted his head so the lock of his long black hair had just slicked back didn't cover his eyes. A strip of dried meat hung from his mouth, and he chewed it as he observed the visitors without even a nod of greeting. Who is it? Came another boy's voice. Head Guild Madam Groundwitch and some others. One's a furry friend. The way he said it didn't bother Janner for some reason. The boy was stating a fact, not hurling an insult. Kalmar didn't seem bothered by it either. I want to see. Another boy, a little taller but dressed the same, with the same slick hair and the unimpressed expression, appeared at the door and looked Kalmar over. Oi, he's furry, he said, and then he went back to whatever he'd been doing. These are the O'Sally boys, said Olympia. Where are the others? She craned her neck to look inside. With Paul, training, out back. The first boy sniffed and swallowed a chunk of meat. You can tell him then, said the guild madam. He has a new student. I won't hear any complaint about it. Her name is Lily Wingfeather, and I wager she'll know dog speak better than either of you by the end of the week. No, she won't, said the boy with a hint of a shrug. Nobody can train better than me and my brothers, not even Paul, though he won't admit it. Don't mean any disrespect, ma'am. I took none, Thorn, but you're wrong. That's always possible, ma'am. Thorn took another bite of meat and looked past them at Lily for the first time. She sat on a bale of hay, scratching a gray horse of a dog behind the ears and singing to it. Behind the gray dog, a dozen more stood patiently in line, as though waiting their turn. Very possible, said Thorn in a nod of surprise. A herd of puppies swarmed into the room on the heels of a skinny man with a beard, so long it tucked into his belt. That's a long beard. There's Paul, said Thorn with a lift of his chin, though it was obvious who the man was. He swaggered just like his sons, wore the same kind of sleeves, shirt, and suspenders, and even slicked back his black hair. The man leaned against the door and nodded at the guild madam. Ma'am, he said, Guildmaster O'Sally, I'd like you to meet the High Queen of Anira and her children. O'Sally bowed without question and stayed there until Nia released him. Your Highness, he said, it's my honor. Welcome to the Houndery. My daughter Lily is to be your new charge, Nia said. She'll work hard and do as she's told. I don't want you to treat her any differently than any other 9-year-old student. If that means she has to take her turn shoveling waste, then so be it. But don't treat her worse either. Lily had recovered her crutch and joined them. Oi, O'Sally smiled at Lily. It'll be good to have a girl around. I'll put her in charge of the puppies. I've 12 this week that need tending. How does that suit you? Lily's mouth hung open. She tried to say something, but instead crumpled to the floor. She had fainted with joy. When they had awoken her, and settled her in the puppy wing of the Houndery, Olympia Groundwitch continued the tour with Janner and Kalmar. She showed them the juicery, where the various juices of ermintine, blue grape, apple, and berry were squeezed, and mixed and boiled and sweetened and canned. They went from there to the Woodwright's cabin where a guild master gave them a quick tour of the tools and projects underway. Students were building things like wagons and mallets and bowls and fences and skull whackers. Then they visited the Rockwright class, the bookbindery, which Janner especially liked, the boatery, the cookery, which Kalmar especially liked, and the needlery, where one learned to make dresses and quilts, which both boys especially disliked. Your father loved to sail, or so I've heard, Olympia said. I'll show you the sailery, but it's held at the waterfront and is reserved for the oldest students. Maybe in a few years there's one more thing to show you. Come. Olympia walked them upstairs, that led to the roof of the main building. From there they could see the field between the keep and the school. The field had been empty that morning when they arrived, but now it was crowded with children. Some were running laps, while others leapt over barrels. Some had as many as 10 dogs harnessed to small wooden crates, and were racing one another down the length of the field, and another group stood in line before an instructor who appeared to be teaching them how to punch. While the opposing line was learning how to block, a whistle blew. The punchers punched, the blockers blocked, and those who got it wrong got a fat lip or a black eye. The guildmaster broke them up and repeated the drill. Janner was suddenly unsure that he wanted to go to school. Wrestling Kalmar was one thing. Fist fighting at school full of students who hated them was another. "Do we have to do that?" he asked. "You don't have to," said Guild Madam Groundwitch, "but it's either that or the needlery." Janner sighed. "What's the matter?" Kalmar asked, jabbing Janner in the ribs. "Afraid you'll have to fight me? Don't look so happy." Janner smacked Kalmar's hand away. "Those kids are bigger than you, and they'd love to punch a gray fang in the face." "Ah, they're too slow." "We'll see," Janner said. He dreaded the class, but he was glad Kalmar seemed like his usual scrappy self. Janner hoped he would stay that way. He couldn't read Kalmar's face anymore, so it troubled him when his brother was quiet. Deep down, he feared that one day Kalmar would look at him with eyes that were no longer blue, but yellow and wild. If a punching class kept the quiet Kalmar away, then fine. Janner was willing to take a punch in the face. Somewhere, a horn blew. The runners and racers and blockers and wrestlers on the field cheered and ran toward the long, low building. "That's the horn for lunch," said the guild madam. "The tour's over. Where would you boys like to begin? In the morning you'll have 2 hours in lectures and learning, followed by 2 hours on the field. After lunch, you'll spend the rest of the afternoon in your chosen guild." "Bookbindery," said Janner. His first choice would have been the sailory, but he was happy to wait till he was older, if it meant he could spend his afternoon with books. Kalmar hesitated. "Son?" Nia said. "Me too." He smiled at Janner. "Bookbindery. I want to go where Janner goes, if that's all right." "No, it isn't." Nia assumed her motherly, no-nonsense tone. "I think we both know you don't care a squawk about bookbinding. You're going to have to choose something you're truly interested in, or the guildmaster will make you miserable. They can tell when you're wasting their time. What do you want to do?" "Well," he said, casting a glance at the field. "Can I do that stuff? The racing and the punching?" "There's plenty of time for that during field training," said Nia. 2 hours before lunch every day. You need to choose a guild, something that they will put your skills to good use." "But I don't have any skills. Not like Janner." "Is there a drawing guild?" "No, but your Thags training will be to your advantage in any number of guilds, like the wood writery." Kalmar didn't look excited about wood. "What about your skills, boy?" Olympia said, growing impatient. "You must be good at something." "I'm fast. I can shoot a bow." Kalmar was fast, and he could outshoot Janner and Poto both at archery. Janner had a hard time imagining his little brother sitting still long enough to enjoy binding a book or building a wagon. "There is another option," Olympia said thoughtfully, appraising Kalmar from head to foot in a new light. "No," Nia said, "he's too young." "I'm the head guild madam, remember? I can make arrangements. They'll allow it if I approve it." "That's not what I mean, Olympia. He's going to have enough time with students his own age. They'll all be older." Nia took Olympia's elbow and gave her a firm look. "And meaner." Guild Madam Groundwitch ignored her and bent low to look Kalmar in the eye. "Lad, there's a guild like the one you're asking about, but it's usually reserved for older students. How old are you?" 11. "You'll be in a class with 13-year-olds, boys and girls 2 feet taller than you." "Are you sure?" Kalmar didn't look sure, but he said, "Yes, ma'am." Kalmar, you'll be hurt, Nia said. If what Grandpa says is true, I'm going to get hurt anyway, right? Nia had no answer, so Olympia spoke. Oi, you're going to get hurt, but at least this way you'll know how to defend yourself. You'll learn how to sneak, too. The Durgan Guild is for spies and fighters. If your mother will allow it, I'll allow it. Kalmar implored Nia with his eyes. Finally, Nia sighed and said, Fine. Kalmar let out a yip of excitement. Janner thought he was out of his mind. Hollish children were tall and strong and used to fighting. 2 hours on the field every day was going to be scary enough. Janner thought he was out of his mind. Hollish, blah, blah, blah. Bookbinding, on the other hand, sounded wonderful. Besides, the children who chose bookbinding as a guild would probably be readers and book lovers too, which meant that for the first time, Janner would have someone to talk to about books, someone other than Oscar N. Ratip. Anyway, the thought came to Janner for the first time since he had arrived in the Green Hollows that he might make friends, real friends, not like the Blaggest boys in Glipwood, who were only good for a laugh and a game of Zibsy. Friends he could read with and write with and talk with. Friends he could still know when he was a grown-up, like Nia and Olumfa or Poto and Buzzard Willie. Janner couldn't wait for bookbinding. You may enjoy the Durgan Guild. That's a lot of questions. Sorry about all your questions, Sophia. That is a lot of them, though. You may join the Durgan Guild, Nia said, holding up a finger, but on one condition. She looked at Janner. Janner looked back for a moment, uncomprehending. Then his eyes widened and his angry heat rose in his chest. He took a step back. You can't be serious! Nia didn't look surprised at his outburst. Janner wheeled on camera. Why couldn't you just pick a normal guild? What's so wrong with the juicery or the cookery? You could eat all day and never get punched once. I didn't mean to. You never mean to. Janner folded his arms and turned away. Janner, listen, Nia said gently. The more I think about it, the more I think Olympia's right. It would be good for your brother to be in the Durgan Guild. If he's going to earn the respect and trust of the Hollish people, this might be the best way to do it. But why does it always feel like the world spins around him? Janner was aware that he was throwing a fit and making a fool of himself, but he didn't care. Why can't he go off and get beaten up without me? Because he's going to need you. If he were in the cookery, he'd be fine. But the Durgan Guild is another matter. What about me? Janner jabbed his own chest and glared at his mother. You're the throne warden, she said. Janner rolled his eyes. He didn't want to be a throne warden right now. He wanted to be a kid with a book under a tree or on a boat in the harbor. He wanted to stomp down the stairs and run till he couldn't run no more. And he didn't want to learn to fight, especially if it meant being thrown into a class of cruel 13-year-olds. He had enough of fighting in the fork factory. But I don't want to be the throne warden, Janner said, with all the bitterness he could muster. I understand, Nia said. Janner had planned to send her over the edge with that comment, but she didn't seem surprised. Sometimes I don't want to be the queen, but what I want doesn't change what I am. Great line. But what I want doesn't change what I am. Great line. You're the throne warden. I'm your mother. Kalmar is your brother. All your anger can't change those facts. That's a great line. But what I want doesn't change what I am. It's a good line. Janner, I don't mind the bookbindery, Kalmar said, or the cookery. I'd love to learn to cook. Let's just forget the whole Durgan Guild thing. Janner stared into the distance and clenched his jaw. He tried not to, but he couldn't help picturing Uncle Arthur looking down at him with disappointment. Janner hated to admit it, but he knew the right thing was to protect his brother, not just from the students at the Gilding Hall, but from Fangs and Bomb Nubbles and even Nag the Nameless. And learning to be a warrior spy was sure to be a bigger help than learning to cook or bind books. Janner's heart was still hard and hot, but he sighed and said, Fine. Olympia cleared her throat. Oi, I'm glad that's all worked out. Let's eat. The Durgan Guild, Chapter 20. So, this is where you learn to be a spy, if I can ever figure it out. There we go. The Jewels of Anira sat at a table with their mother and guild madam Groundwitch and ate a lunch of smoked hen meat on brown bread. The hall was long, with a low ceiling and many windows. A table at the front bore several platters of hen meat, along with potatoes and apples. And beside the platters were piles of crispy loaves of bread. The line of guildlings had dwindled to just a few by the time the wing feathers arrived, which meant that everyone in the room watched them enter, get their food, and follow Guild Madam Groundwitch to the empty table. Thorn O'Sally had already brought Lily from the Houndry and even got her a plate of food before swaggering off to eat with his friends. Janner was so irritated, he hardly noticed the students watching his brother's every move. Nia and Olympia chattered about old times, while the children ate in silence. Lily couldn't tell Janner was upset, but she restrained her glee about the Houndry. When the plates were clean and a horn blew, the students filed out of the dining hall and went to their guilds. Nia hugged each of the children, told them she'd pick them up in a few hours, and left. Head Guild Madam Groundwitch turned to them and smiled. Janner tried to convince himself that nothing bad was going to happen. Well, my new guildlings, Olympia said, wiping the crumbs from the whiskers around her mouth, the time has come. She led them back toward the Houndry in silence. Lily, Guildmaster O'Sally is expecting you for your first afternoon in the Houndry Guild, Olympia said as they approached the door. You'll be here for the rest of the day with a class full of guildlings. I'll ask O'Sally to keep watch over you, especially in the beginning. I think you'll like him. Biggin and his boys are strange, but they know dogs better than anyone in the city. Do as he says. Call him Guildmaster O'Sally until he tells you otherwise. Questions? Lily shook her head and took a deep breath. She smiled at Janner and Kalmar, but Janner could tell she was nervous. He wanted to tell her to cheer up. At least she wasn't about to get a pounding, but he changed his mind. You'll be fine, Janner thought, and he told her a quick hug. We'll see you in a little while. Kalmar squeezed her arm and smiled, but then Lily stepped into the Houndry. She was greeted by so many dogs that she nearly fell over. The door closed on the sound of her laughter. The guild madam was already striding away, and the boys ran to catch up. They followed a walkway to the edge of the flagstone courtyard, where she stopped and looked and held out a hand for silence. Janner counted 14 students sitting in a circle in the center of the yard, watching two other students as they tumbled about on the ground in vicious combat. A man sat among the students in a circle, pointing at the wrestlers and speaking from time to time. This, Olympia said in a voice just above a whisper, is the Durgan Guild. It's the oldest of the Hallish guilds, named after Colin Durga. Oi, she gave the boys a meaningful look. As if she had known, if they should know who Canola Durga was, but all she got were blank stares. Because they didn't know who it was. Pa, you mean to tell me your mother didn't teach you any Hallish history? Well, you saw the statue in the courtyard, didn't you? The man on the horse was Canolan Durga, one of the great warriors of our land. He drove out the Ridge Runners in the Second Epoch when they evaded and set fire to the outer vales. They infested the hollows like grouches, creeping into homes and barns at night to burn them and scare us away. The house fires lit the trees, and 100 miles of orchards were consumed. Whole acres of fruit gone. Fruit! She looked at the boys again, to be sure they appreciated the gravity of the loss. They pretended to be shocked. And she continued, Kanolan Durga was the only chief cunning enough to muster us in the chaos to defeat the Ridge Runners and their allies. The Bannock Durga is named after him, as is the Finnick Durga. The Durgan Guild is a fellowship of warriors and spies. Spies? Kalmar whispered. Oi, for as long as you can remember, the Ridge Runners have crept into our borders to steal fruit and animals and tools, but mainly fruit. The little swipers, they love it, and who can blame them? We actually do a bit of trading with them, under the strictest protocols, of course, and only at the border. Our Durgans counter their efforts, but it seems there's no end to their appetite for sneakery. Our Durgans counter their efforts. Now, of course, it's more than Ridge Runners we fight. It's Fangs and the Cloven, too. As annoyed as Janner had been, he was warming to the idea of creeping through the forest with a company of fellow watchmen, sending signals by the light of the moon, and chasing Ridge Runners over hill and vale. That's Guildmaster Clout, Olympia sniffed. He's a despicable man, arrogant, short-tempered, and rude. She glared at him for a moment and muttered, I'd marry the old rot bag faster than I could pluck a whisker, but he acts like I don't exist. Despicable man. The guild madam scratched at her bony jaw with one hand and twirled a lock of hair with the other. Janner imagined her as a young girl, lanky and outcast, spying on her popular classmates from behind a hedgerow. Despicable or not, he's the finest guild master of Durgan technique and I've ever seen. He'll evaluate you for 2 months, and if you can pass muster, you're in. You boys clear on that? Good. Olympia straightened and tugged her sleeves as if to conceal her knobby wrists. She held her breath, plucked another whisker, flicked it into the bushes, and lopped into the courtyard just as one of the 2 students in the ring got socked in the face by the other. The girl who got hit spun around and crumpled to the ground. Olympia crossed the courtyard with her hand extended, stepping out over the groaning student without a glance. When Janner and Kalmar approached the circle, the guildlings backed away and flanked the guildmaster. None of them bothered to conceal the look of disgust on their faces. They scowled at Kalmar and looked ready to pounce on him. Janner felt his arms and shoulders tingle at the clear sense of danger. The last time he had felt his skin prickle like that was when the snick buzzard swooped down on him and Marala on the snow peak of the witch's nose. It took effort to stand his ground and not grab Kalmar and run. Guild Madam Groundwitch, said the man in a menacing voice. Doesn't do to interrupt the Durgan Guild. We've spoken about this before. I require privacy and focus. Guildmaster Clout. Olympia's dark tone equaled Clout's, but she seemed even more threatening because she stood at least a hand taller, and she had 8 whiskers. As head guild madam of this institution, I reserve the right to interrupt you as often as I please. If you're like to have a tackle and smash to sort it out, I'm ready. She pushed up the sleeves of her dress, revealing her knobby elbows, balled her hands into fists. When the muscles in her forearms flexed, she looked like a furless bomb nubble. That won't be necessary, said Clout with a glance at his students. Janner suspected he didn't want to lose a fight in front of his guildlings. What can I do for you? Headmaster Guild Madam Groundwitch? I hope you haven't come to enroll this scrawny lad in his pet. The guildlings snickered. Clout hushed them with a wave of his hand. I've come to enroll Janner and Kalmar Wingfeather in the Durgan Guild. Janner is the throne warden of Anira, and Kalmar the High King. Oi, you heard me, right? But they're not old enough. If you're 13 years old, I'm a basket of sweepleberries. I won't allow it. They're 11 and 12 years old, and our long alliance with the Shining Isle demands that we be willing to make an exception. They'll be smashed up by the end of every day, Guild Madam. I don't wish to incur the wrath of their mother. Nor their grandfather again, I'd wager, said Olympia with a sneer. It wasn't a fair fight, snapped the guildmaster. His peg leg might as well be a weapon. I only ask that you evaluate them for 2 months, as you would any other guildling. Oi, and I can tell from the older one's scars that he's seen more action than every one of these students. Janner, how many fangs have you fought? Madam, I don't know. Janner was startled to be introduced in the conversation. 1 with a sword, several with arrows, 10 maybe? Olympia folded her arms and looked pleased at the surprise on the students' faces. How many fangs have your guildlings fought? She asked Clout. You know the answer to that, Guild Madam. How many? None, Guildmaster Clout said through his teeth. Fine, I'll allow the older one, but not the fang. Olympia took a step nearer to Clout. I forbid you to call the boy a fang. I'll admit he looks it, but his eyes tell the rest of the tale. That's no fang. It's the High King, and he deserves your respect. Kalmar, she said, still holding Clout's gaze, how many fangs have you killed? 27, said Kalmar without hesitation. Janner looked at him with surprise. He knew Kalmar had shot a lot of fangs at Miller's Bridge, but he didn't know he had kept count. Now the guildlings whispered among themselves. Their surprise turned to quiet excitement. Guildmaster Clout sighed. I'll evaluate them for 2 months, but if they're not ready by then, that's the end of it. I won't coddle them just because they're royalty, and you can't meddle. Is that understood? Understood, said Olympia. I wasn't asking you, said Clout. He stepped away from Olympia and towered over the Wingfeather boys. Is that understood? Yes, sir, the boys said. Then it's settled, Olympia said. Janner, Kalmar, I'll send your mother to pick you up this afternoon. Guildmaster Clout, they're all yours. She nodded at Clout and walked away. As soon as she was around the corner of the building and out of sight, Clout said, Circle up. Janner and Kalmar followed as the guildlings created a ring and sat, awaiting further instruction. Broza, Larnick, Clout said. The 2 biggest boys stood. Janner and Kalmar, isn't it? They nodded and gulped in unison. Commence! Guildmaster Clout stepped outside the circle. As Browza and Larnick, with bone-chilling growls, leapt on the Wingfeather boys and let their fists fly. Oh, man. That would hurt a lot. Next chapter. A late caller. So, you should go on to... We were kind of running out of time. You should go on to